Oh, how I'd love to one day make myself a YouTube channel reviewing cartoons and movies. What is that? I smack my lips too much. Oh my fucking god, never mind. Hi, so this is my first video. I have a hard time, getting a script together, and I really just wanted to make a random video because I've never done it. And I don't think there's a point in spending all this effort into a video that will not get seen, or watched, or anything. All of you assholes can pay me before I will make a video with that much effort. Anyway. There's one of these films has a lot of bad shit in it. The other one not so bad. I will put all the info and the timestamps right here for you. Hello. Um so I just wanted to make some videos because a certain company will charge me $150 to cancel a subscription that I don't need. So here I am. I don't have an adequate camera. This is it. Whatever. You can fucking pay me. I am a trans man, and I have been transitioning, although I don't really think that's an accurate thing or accurate way to depict say an accurate way to explain the trans experience, but I have been on HRT, I guess, for 2.5 years. One thing about me that you should know before I start talking about these films is that I did not go to school, and that doesn't mean I can't analyze film, but I also don't know the stupid jargon that goes with a lot of this stuff. I do okay, but I don't know all of the terminology that best explains things right. And honestly, I'm the type of person that would rather not use words and would just rather show you or explain the feelings or general feelings you get while looking at a work, because I'm an artist. That is my background, and that is something important to me. And even though I'm a cartoonist and a painter, I'm like an illustrator, most of my inspirations come from film and sequential art. So I do kind of have a background in that, even though I don't make films or really review films very often, but I just thought that. So most of this is just going to be like visual representation, how I see media as a trans man, and its visual cues, and what about that is important about representation of trans men in film. I actually got this idea from a certain person on TikTok who decided to briefly talk about movies with trans men in them. So I just thought that would be interesting to maybe look at these movies and kind of dig deeper into representation of trans men in film, and kind of discuss the tropes with that, because just because there's so few movies with trans men in them, it kind of makes it an easy discussion and an easy topic. Whereas analyzing trans women in film is a lot different because of how widespread it is. And honestly, it's probably really complicated, more complicated than we give it credit for, because as we all know, at least everyone of my ilk knows, is that trans men were in the past and in antiquity depicted as lesbians throughout history. So we have that going for us, I guess. So just because it's my background, I just thought this would be an interesting topic to discuss. And also, I don't see trans men talking about things other than day-to-day life stuff, and they make trans YouTubers either make educational videos or they make blah blah blah. And I just want something like this, you know, from a trans person, and I've only really seen a handful of people doing it. So like I said before, there aren't very many films depicting trans men, or like trans men who are obviously trans men, which is like a kind of difficult in its own right. Like, how do you define a trans man exactly? How do you define specific genders? You can't really do that. It's not cut and dry, is it? It's not. So when we're looking at film, we have all of this stuff listed as movies with trans men in them. But is it every movie with a trans man in it? I think that might be debatable. I think that's debatable. So, like, on Wikipedia, when I look at trans men in movies, we will have a good 10 of them. And these are particular circumstances where they are female-bodied, whatever that means, and they identify as men, or like try to make it clear to the characters around them in the film that they are men. Whether or not they take it seriously, it depends on the movie and the time period of the movie. My first impression is I don't think the majority of these films are going to be good. Like, production quality wise, I don't think they're gonna be very big budget films. Only a couple of them are notably famous, like Boys Don't Cry. That movie is very famous. In fact, someone already made a YouTube video about it, which I might link, because it's a good video. And this is also another inspiration for me to like talk about visual representation of trans men in film and how it's different than trans women, because it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting topic. But what you'll notice immediately off the bat is obviously there are a lot less films that depict trans men or the idea of trans men than trans women. And honestly, if you look at the actual films and the Wikipedia list that lists trans women characters, a lot of them aren't in the same way that a lot of these characters are kind of wish-washy. It's kind of wish-washy for these trans women characters also. And also considering a lot of trans women depicted in media are depicted as extremely, extremely violent. Extremely. Like, most of these characters are serial killers and depicted as criminals, just all around violent. And while I would say, like, that's not exclusive to trans women when trans women are depicted in media, but they're the grand majority of trans people depicted in the media. The grand majority. If there is ever a topic of gender or character being exploited, it's usually a trans woman. If any movie brings a trans or like gender non-conforming character into a film, it'll be a trans woman or someone who looks like a trans woman. but their depiction is, trans women's depictions in media are extremely, like, negative. Like, extremely negative. And, you know, that's why trans women are seen as violent, because of this history, this really long history of films depicting trans women as violent predators and, like, degenerate, awful, inhuman people. Like, yeah. And I think that's also why the majority of people assume trans men are depicted as innocent in media. And the opposite of that, it's really easy to assume that. Because why wouldn't you? There are all these films that depict trans women as this extremely violent caricature. Why? Why wouldn't that be the case? But I think it's more complicated. Because trans men aren't really seen as trans. And there's also lots of weird things about misogyny that affect trans men in really odd, indetectable ways. Because, you know, we're kind of, in what people have said before, invisible. Although I don't really think it's invisible. I think in the media we're invisible. Sort of. But I don't think that means we are visible to the general public. Because media is in a different thing. Media is different. And there are different types of media that have more trans men or trans masculine, like, representation in them. In fact, we could go into the fact that this Wikipedia list does not include cartoons or any other media besides film, which, you know, to me as a cartoonist and someone who likes animation, this is bullshit, because that is also film. There are many film genres that aren't included on this list. So that's another thing we can go into, is that this list isn't really adequate. And so how many characters are actually there that could fall under these categories? And, you know, are these lists accurate? Not really. But am I gonna use it anyway? For now? Out of convenience? Yeah. It's a difficult discussion. It's difficult to talk about gender and trans people in general because they're hard to detect as different groups. Because gender is a construct. It's a social construct. So out of the Wikipedia list, aesthetically, I only really like two of the films. The John Waters film and By Hook or By Crook. Those are the two that are aesthetically more artistic, more interesting. John Waters films are really extremely offensive, but, you know, I do think you know, it's worth analysis at least. Even though, considering there's lots of harmful things depicted in John Waters' films, I think you could still take away some things from it, whereas some movies on this list are basically shot like ads. I just don't really have a connection to a film that's shot like an ad. Just seems like it's... Maybe it's just because of the way I am, but, like, I don't... Like, Romeo's was really, like... It seemed like one of those ads that you would see in, like, a band ad compilation on YouTube. That's kind of what it reminded me of. So I would, I did not like Romeo's that much. A lot of people like the movie, but I think it's because we're given so little that we just take what we can get. And I don't think that's fair, is it? I'm gonna judge it for as it is. Every movie on this list, I'm going to judge it based on every other movie I've seen with trans people in them or not. Are they good movies? I don't know. I only really think a couple of them are interesting or good movies or something worth watching. I think a couple of them a lot of movies with trans people in them either exploit us or the idea of us for to make a character mentally ill or make a foil for another character. That's really what trans characters exist for. There's not usually it's difficult. Hopefully that will change in the future, but I feel like most of the trans men on this list that are in these films aren't even trans men. Like, I don't consider women that had to pretend to be men to find work, or that I don't consider that a trans man movie. That's them having to do what they need to do to survive. That's not them IDing genuinely as a man. That's them playing a part for financial benefits. And like, yes, it's a big part of trans men's history. A lot of trans men end up in those roles and like it. There are people that transitioned in order to find better work in many countries. But I don't, that's a bit wishy-washy. Not all of that are people, not all of those people were really men. They just kind of like, and it's kind of hard to define a gender in the first place, and who is genuinely being themselves or likes playing a part or is just doing it for financial benefit or safety. It's hard to say. Boys Don't Cry is on this Wikipedia list. I'm not watching that shit because someone already made a video essay about Boys Don't Cry. It's on the channel Boyform. He made a really good video about it, so I'm just gonna link it because the movie's mostly bad, like mostly violent and bad. Like all of these movies are, but also pretty harmful. I'll talk about tropes in a minute here, but there are lots of tropes you can detect in these films. Even though there are a few of them, you can kind of get a gist for the types of tropes that appear in movies with trans men. So there's the misogynistic trope where you make them a coward, an abuser, just an overall criminal. That seems to be a theme amongst trans men being depicted. I don't know if I count John Waters, but yeah, Mole did seem more abusive than the other characters and more angry and just outwardly like just dubious character-wise. Just a dubious character who isn't very sympathetic and kind of comes off as extremely annoying. And that is the whole joke to his character, is that he is annoying. There's another trope that just depicts trans men as just lesbians or like hysterically mentally ill women. So like all of the misogyny boxes are completely blown out the window. That's most of the depictions of trans men in film, by the way. It's just, they're just depicted as lesbians and lesbian women. Yeah. So like, that's probably the biggest common thing you'll see, is that, yeah. It seems like most of these films view trans men as hysterical. Even in Romeo's, which is a newer one. Trans men also kind of are depicted as hysterical women, or just abusive men, or men that are criminals, or just blend into society so much that they're completely erased of their transness, which is a lot like what you see in real life. When people treat trans men, they kind of don't acknowledge their queerness and either see them as hysterical women or hysterical men. Either way, that seems to be the limit to the personalities expressed within these characters. I'm not counting By Hook or By Crook because it breaks all of these conventions, because it's actually directed and filmed and stars trans men in it, whereas none of these other films do that. None of them. None. Which is another conversation on its own. So there's only one film on Wikipedia that depicts a genuine trans man in any of these films. Just one. Out of the 10 that are there. All of the rest of them are either portrayed as cis men or cis women. Which is so different compared to, like, there's a lot of newer movies with trans women in them and trans women actresses. And maybe that'll change with Elliot Page coming out. I think that's the first time the mainstream media even considered that trans men existed. Especially in film. Maybe that'll come up in the future. I don't really know. But it seems like there's a ton more trans women in film than trans men. There isn't even a single movie that's a big budget film portraying a trans man, like, really. I guess maybe there's a trans man in Degrassi. And there's a couple of other things. Like, I might need to count TV shows, cartoons, and stuff like that to really get the full picture. But for just, like, movies, this is it. It seems like, for the Wikipedia list. Which is kind of disappointing. But that's the Wikipedia list. We will find more in the future. Yeah.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. And desperate living.
I don't recommend watching John Waters films unless you are very used to seeing gore, used to seeing horror. Keep in mind that all the effects and all the fucking dead animals in this film are real. So, like, take that for what you will. It kind of sucks. There's lots of films like that existed back then and further in the past. But, like... Okay, so the John Waters film, Desperate Living, was released in 1977. If you know a lot about John Waters films, you know about Pink Flamingos and his gross out humor, which is basically, most of his films are for shock value, so that kind of, like, brings the premise into light. This film in particular is kind of loosely, sort of about revolution and overthrowing fascism is kind of the goal of the film. It's got some other things mixed in with it, like dead rats and cockroaches, a botched phalloplasty. We got all of that. But there are lots of fucking triggers in this film. Actually, I would not watch this movie if you have any, like, serious... There is dead animals in it. There's lots of like really uncanny, awful, triggering stuff in it. Because it's a John Waters film. That's what his films do. That's like all of his films. So it's in this one also. There's also a dead dog in the. That's probably the worst one. Is there's a dead dog in the beginning of the film. And probably one of the main things you could ask or get from John Waters films is like, was this necessary? And was any of this shit necessary? I don't know. I think in a lot of ways it was kind of harmful. And lots of things in this movie were harmful. Definitely the stigma towards the trans character in the film, the way he was portrayed. Even on the IMDb page, the trans man character is called a lesbian. When throughout the film, he says, "I am a man," over and over and over again. And the whole premise of his character is to make fun of his insecurity about not having a penis. Like, the entire character is revolved around that as a joke. That is the joke to his character, is that he's insecure because he doesn't have a penis. That's the whole joke. It's the whole joke. So, the fact that he is called a lesbian in the IMDb page is fucking... Did you watch the movie? Who wrote that? IMDb description. Who wrote that? Who wrote that? I don't know. But it's there. It's a very colorful movie. John Waters films are very colorful. They always have this like disgusting like feeling to them, but they're also very colorful. The sets are colorful. All the buildings are colorful. The sets are colorful. Really garish looking. But they always have that certain vibe to them. And aesthetically, I can appreciate that than a lot of other films on this list. Even though John Waters films are kind of bad. Although it's not, surprisingly, it's not that racist. I expected it to be worse. There is a black maid character, but she's awesome. But what happened? It's so funny because I thought I made a joke to myself when they both left the house together in the car. Oh, they're lesbians. And they began. It's so funny. I just like, but she does die. And I don't know, I can't tell if that's a commentary about how people kill off black characters in films, or if they just did that for the same reasons. It's kind of hard to say. Because satire kind of like, in my opinion, a lot of satire that does that, and a really egregious example of that would be South Park. You can't tell if they're actually like doing it genuinely or actually doing anything, because the end result ends up with the result you had before, and you didn't really comment on their death or why that was of poor taste, or why that contributes to harmful ideology. So that's also why I could talk about John Waters' films being kind of, other than the sentiment of revolution and overthrowing fascism in this particular movie, I don't think it has a very good message. Especially in regards to trans people, they kind of just label everyone a lesbian. Yeah, I don't know. I think this film, other than talking about overthrowing fascism, it also talks about misogyny, and also I can't tell if his portrayals are genuinely misogynistic, or he is making a commentary about misogyny. It's kind of difficult to tell, because you can tell in the beginning, he kind of broke the boundary of the... he definitely criticized the nuclear family. He criticized just standards United States conventions, cultural conventions. But yeah. But it seems like he didn't go far enough to where I don't know what he was thinking of doing with Mole as a character. Mole as the trans man. Well, he does end up like he's like the leader of the people who finished the movie. He partakes in the revolution. He cooks the queen with his lesbian friends. Oh, by the way, spoilers. I don't think spoilers ruin a film. That's my opinion. You'll get the same experience by just watching it. I don't think my descriptions are enough for you to fully experience the film. Yeah. But it seems like Mole is like the personification of Freud's penis envy theory. Trans men aren't universally like that. I could go on and on about that. But the way that Mole's character is just the embodiment of humiliation, I think that is the only thing that's correct. Just the frustration and the humiliation over and over again. I think that's the only thing that was correct about it. And just the overall disdain and like how people treat you like a mentally ill person when you're trans. A lot of it was played off as jokes, and he is still a violent abuser. Everyone in this show is violent, but he was just like portrayed as a fucking idiot and a coward the entire movie up until the end, which is strange. And I don't know. John Waters movies are batshit. They're batshit. That's what they're supposed to be. They're just weird. They got weird shit in them, and that's why people watch them, because they're like, oh, they got weird shit in it. Oh, it's funny, weird. So it's kind of like bad in that way, because it kind of uses trans people, it uses people of color, it uses gay people, it uses all these marginalized groups as kind of like, hey, look at how fucking freaky we are, blah 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 blah, look how degenerate our film is, we have people of color and gay people in it. And he's kind of weird because he's kind of seen as this film prodigy and this like anti-capitalist, like progressive film prodigy, when I don't think a lot of his films are that progressive. There's some messaging in the movie that's important, but it comes in this package that's just full of racism, full of misogyny, and full of bullshit. So like, take your pick, I guess. I don't know. I just feel like there could be better films out there that don't exist yet. And it sucks that the two good ones with trans men in it have a lot of, one has a lot of problems and the other one is just a poor, like, budget film that people with less privilege made than a cis white man with a whole film budget.
Just wanted to mention an interesting thing about the John Waters film. The seahorse on Mole's house is interesting because trans men who are pregnant and give birth are called seahorse daddies because seahorses are male and can give birth. So that's interesting. I just thought that was an interesting detail. By hook or by crook? What the fuck does that mean? I'm looking it up on Google. The government intends by hook or by crook to hold the land.
By hook or by crook is my favorite of the films, just because it is made entirely by trans people. It stars trans men in it. And it's also very aesthetically pleasing. There's lots of really good shots. It's a 2000s grunge film, and it's got lots of neat shots of San Francisco, and it's got the the writing. It's kind of hard to follow in the beginning from a story standpoint, but it picks up later, and you end up really liking the characters. And the way the dialogue is written, it's almost like it was put into a random text generator. It's really funny. I just really. The sense of humor in the film is very, like, Gen Z humor, which is weird. So, like, if you like weird movies, I think you would love this film. It's just really funny in that way. Just the dialogue is hilarious. And I laughed a lot watching it. And the characters are neat, and they're different, and you just see them fuck around in a hardware store and, like, do stupid shit. It's really funny. I don't know. They just do lots of stuff. It's actually surprising how much is in this film, and yeah, it was at a Sundance Film Festival, so it's got some meat in it. It's got something to it, and I think there are some parts in the beginning that seemed kind of pretentious and weren't a great start for the film. Like, at the beginning, I was kind of like, why are they all these shots being played over and over? What? There's some weird, awkward dubs in it as well. Some errors. But honestly, that kind of adds to the type of film it is. Because it's a grunge film. It's, like, really textured. It's supposed to be, like, not following film conventions. It's like, it's that way on purpose, and it makes it kind of neat and interesting. It's definitely a lot better than many films I've seen, especially the films on this list. Way better than Romeo's was. Romeo's was awful. It was shot like a really, like, yeah, it was shot like a commercial. It's like the least thing I would want. And also, it just has a lot of issues, and I'll go into that, but aesthetically, I think it's the most boring looking film. Like, they are polar opposites. There are definitely flaws with By Hook or By Crook. Like, little ones, but they're enjoyable. I think the film is enjoyable, and that's what the best part about it is. It's very colorful, lots of interesting visual, just, it's very pretty. It's a very pretty film. It's shot in San Francisco. Really cool characters. I like the character interactions. They're really funny. Some parts of it remind me of early 2000s, 90s FMV games. That's what it reminds me of, and that's probably why I like it so much, because it's just, like, got that vibe to it. It's so grainy and, like, kind of, like, some of the dialogue is delivered awkwardly, and then there's some weird dubs in some places, and but I like that. I think it's really charming. That's something I find charming in things, so maybe you will also. And also the characters, the dialogue, like I said, is fucking hilarious. I don't know. There's lots of random shit you could quote from this film. Like, I'll have to pull up some examples.
Hi, I just wanted to read to you the dialogue from By Hook or By Crook the excellent dialogue. You got two shoes, I see. One of them matches the other one. Two incredible shoes. Go fuck yourself. You'd get more action that way. And man, look at me, man. I am the diamond. I am the rock in the big fire. I'm the Tin Man. Ting, ting, ting. Toe to toe, tat to tat, that's what the French say. You're one of those people who eats chicken and then saves a bone and then puts it on your wall and keeps it for the rest of your life. What is wrong with you people?
and many more. By Hook or by Crook it's like a buddy crime movie, sort of, where they just try to scam people for money, and it's pretty funny. Like, there's a part of the movie where they have this awkward scene with squirt guns, and they're like pumping water into a vending machine to get change, and it's really funny. I don't know. There's just lots of funny shit like that in the movie. So the two main characters are trans men, and they're both different. They're like, one of them is kind of like clean cut, looks like Cooper from Twin Peaks, sort of. He's kind of like, he's got a blue suit on, and there's some good shots with him like holding cigarettes and stuff. It looks really good. and then and then the other guy, his name is Valentine or Val. He's I think I'm not sure how to feel about his character. I don't think it was offensive. They definitely were trying to like make him mentally ill, but it wasn't like it wasn't like uh like I think it was like not completely his character. He's just his dialogue is really strange, and like I don't know, I laughed at a lot of his dialogue. Um it's just a strange, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this movie, because it's basically like an FMV video game. That's what it reminds me of, but it's really colorful, and it's got that 2000s grunge aesthetic, and it's kind of like, and there's like punk music. Most of the soundtrack is punk music, and then there's this one track that's got sort of midis and and some MIDI synths in some parts, and then there's like an accordion MIDI sound somewhere. I think it's just really cute. I don't know. There's just lots of cute things in it. There's this one part that made me laugh really hard. After after a low point in the film, so I don't spoil it. Shy, the main character, goes into a convenience store and like really awkwardly tries to rob the cashier with a plastic squirt gun inside of a chip bag, and she just like hits him in the face. It was just really like pathetic, but it was really funny. I don't know. There's just like shit like that in the film that's funny and strange. And like I said, the dialogue is really, really like something. It's really something. The girlfriend of Valentine says some shit like, I don't like going out to eat. All these people in pain from having to work there, it makes me uncomfortable. And I was like, wow. Yeah. There's lots of like, and most of the dialogue is kind of hard. Like I said, it's kind of got a comprehension. There's some hard readability in some areas, especially in the beginning. It was kind of hard for me to follow what was going on, and they don't really, everything is kind of, that's probably that's the most difficult thing about the movie, is that the coherence is kind of messy. It's kind of hard to just tell what's going on, or like there's no dialogue in a scene transition, and you're like, wait, what are they doing, or what is happening? Like, I don't know. It seems like a student film of some kind. That's kind of what it looks like to me. even though it looks really good, there's definitely flaws with it. But it's definitely enjoyable regardless, and it's very cool and fun to see that kind of thing. Um, yeah, lots of the dialogue made me laugh, and the shots were cool. So I think it's the best film out of all of them, and um, yeah, it was also really respectful. Like, not obviously, the characters weren't portrayed as like trans because they were mentally ill, like many of these other films do. They weren't branded as hysterical, even though one of the characters was mentally ill. He was still seen as a human being and a person, which is kind of amazing considering the film has such a problem with coherence. Even throughout all of that, you can still kind of get the vibe from each character and still like feel for the character and what's going on, even though it's kind of hard to follow in certain areas. I think that's kind of interesting. Um, Most of the movie is style. I think like it's very stylized. It's very like a product of its time. Also, you see some types of tropes you would see in early 2000s films. Um, well, also just plot structure sort of functions in that way. Um, yeah, lots of flashbacks. it's all it's a good movie. If you like watching Red Letter Media or like stuff like that, you the VHS tapes, you'd fucking love this movie. It's funny as hell. You would love it. It's a good movie to like drink with people and watch. It's funny.
So that is two of the 10 movies on the Wikipedia list for trans men in film. I don't like a lot of these movies. These were the two I kind of liked aesthetically that I consider that um, I felt like watching. I may do the rest of the list of relevant films, or I may ignore it. Depends on what happens. It's a long video. Really long. But thank you anyway for getting this far. You are a trooper. And so am I. I've spent 3 days editing this fucking bullshit.